And good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Beyond Access series. My name is Jose Rios Lua. I'm the Director of Family Empowerment and Communications here at the Division of Specialized Instruction and Student Support. It's a long name. I sometimes forget it myself. Tonight, we're continuing our series on executive cognitive functioning with Dr. Bruce Wexler. As in every night, you all have access to the Q&A function, so please use that to submit any questions that you may have. We're going to have some different spots throughout the presentation to stop, check in, look at some of those questions and answer them. Dr. Wexler has also prepared some engaging questions for you all today that we're going to use through polls, so please be ready to, throughout the presentation, look at your screen and answer the poll. Those are all the announcements that I have right now. So without any further ado, let's welcome back Dr. Wexler.
Thanks, Jose. Happy to be here. Is everybody seeing my screen now, or do I have to do something?
Not yet. You'll have to share your screen with us.
Okay, thank you. Suddenly I have more choices. How's that working?
Looks great.
Okay, terrific. Okay, good. Okay, well, happy to be here again. Welcome back to those of you who were able to join me for the first two of my presentations on executive cognitive function. Our discussions will hopefully have even more chance for interaction and discussion tonight than we did before. And for those of you who were not with me the last couple of times, here's an overview of the first two sessions. What we did and what we were focusing on are executive cognitive functions. And these are a set of cognitive skills essential for managing your emotions, behavior, and for learning. They include focused attention, self-control, flexible thinking, and memory. And executive functions are necessary to analyze situations, plan and take action, adjust actions as needed to get the job done, focus and maintain your attention, switch your attention to one aspect of a task or another, control yourself so you don't get distracted and go off and do something else instead, remember what you're doing and how to do it, and manage time. And we pointed out in the first session that many children who learn differently have different and more limited development of their executive cognitive functions. And when you look at the list of things here that executive cognitive functions are important for, I think you can appreciate how those limitations, less fully developed executive cognitive functions in your children manifest themselves in these issues that you see every day around the house in terms of being able to remember what they're doing, focus and maintain their attention, not drop a task in the middle and switch to something else. And we talked about the fact that this creates challenges for the child, of course, but also for their parents and families. And there's been research shown that parents of children who learn differently and have slower, less complete development of their executive functions, parents experience a lot of stress. And the main point of our first presentation was to say that we know that. This is what executive functions are important for, and slower and incomplete development manifests itself in ways that are problematic for the child, but also for you. And the first step in taking care of your children is to be able to take care of yourself too. So that was what we talked about the first time. The second session, we talked about tips and tools for fun ways to enhance your child's executive function just during the course of everyday life. And some of these opportunities are related to family chores. Just having a child help you empty the dishwasher. They then have to figure out where the different dishes go and where does the silverware go. This sort of sorting and categorization and attention are part of executive function. Same thing with the laundry. Sorting the laundry into different clothes for different family members, different types of clothes for different drawers in the bureau. And then there are games when you're driving in the car, walking down the street or at home. 20 questions is a game for older children. Another game is, what am I thinking? I am thinking of a small animal with a little tail and big ears. What am I thinking of? And so then that helps the child have an idea of their mind and your mind and do some sort of inductive thinking, which is part of executive function. And the key thing in these games, and I think, as Jose said, I think these previous lectures are available for you all online, and then you can look at those. A number of people responded that they thought that these suggestions were actually useful and fun things to try at home. And the key thing to remember, though, when you're doing them, these are opportunities to dial down the pressure and turn up the fun. So those are the things we talked about in the first two sessions. Tonight, we're going to talk more about neuroscience, more of an academic type of presentations about how our brains function and how they support these critically important executive cognitive functions. Let you know some things about how we measure executive function, how we can then harness the brain's neuroplasticity to improve executive function. Some of those ways are through things like music, sports, and dance. Other ways are through neuroscience-based, computer-based cognitive training games that actually exercise those parts of the brain. And another is meditation. So that's an overview of what we're going to be talking about. So once again, executive cognitive functions: self-control, focused attention, cognitive flexibility, memory, critical for so much of what we do in life. So Jose, is part of my screen being covered by this control panel from Zoom?
Nope, we see your full screen.
Oh, okay. Not so. This thing I'm moving around is not something you see.
No.
Okay, good. Thanks. So this picture you see here, and you can see my cursor, I think. So this picture over here is a picture from the 19th century, and it's how people 200 years ago thought about how our brains worked and how they support our cognitive functions. And what they thought was that each part of the brain was specialized by itself for a specific cognitive or even moral function. So some parts may have to do with self-reflecting. How do you think about yourself? This part of the brain in this particular one was talking about certain artistic values of sublimity. Others are talking about other sections dedicated to memory, to speech, and even to moral qualities, an area for generosity. But now we know in the 21st century neuroscience, that's not the way our brains work. Instead, every function we do, even just remembering a word, activates many parts of the brain, sections all through the brain that are integrated into neural systems. And it's these systems that support thinking, help us regulate our emotions, are important for cognitive flexibility, for executive cognitive functions. So what about the connections between the neurons that make the systems, right? Because these are all connections between the individual cells in our brain and then to other cells nearby and to cells far away. Where do these connections come from? The Nobel Prize was given to two scientists who demonstrated that the connections between our cells that constitute and make up these functional systems so we can think, those connections are shaped after birth by stimulation from the environment. That's what we mean by neuroplasticity. It's the actual structure and function of the brain are shaped after birth by stimulation from our environments. And as you know, our children are raised in essentially human-made environments now. And that's what school's involved and all the electronic media that children interact with. All of these are human-made environmental stimuli that are shaping our brains. A famous quote from a neurologist: neurons that fire together, wire together. So Jose, I think this is the time for our first poll question.
All right, so I'm yep. So I'm going to put up on the screen the first poll question.
And please, the reason we do these polls, one reason is that it lets me know whether I'm being clear enough. And so, and whether I need to explain some things more before I move forward to build the story of the talk and our discussion this evening. So please take a moment and vote on these. And then Jose will give us an idea of how it turns out. I guess
Absolutely.
yeah.
And for those who are joining on our interpreter lines, I'm going to read these out so that you can hear what the options are from the interpreters. So the question is, our brains work, and that asks you to choose one option. The first option is, with each small area responsible for different paths or different parts of our thinking or feeling. And the second question is, with many small areas all over the brain joining together for thinking and feeling. We're going to give that a couple more seconds as folks are.
You getting some responses coming in?
We're getting some responses. We have about 58% of participants who have responded.
Oh, over half already. Terrific.
And so it looks like the vast majority of people are selecting option number 2.
Terrific. Terrific. So those of you who may have thought about option 1 still, that is the older view. Oh, going the wrong way here now. I can't go backwards. Okay, there we go. Okay, 88%. So that is the correct answer. Why don't we close this and see if I can get control of my screen, my slides again to go to where I want to go. Okay, so this is what we had just said, that those small areas that are joined together, the connections that make that possible are shaped by input from our environments, and we call that neuroplasticity. And this is important because we're going to take advantage of that neuroplasticity to try and improve executive function in children where it's slower to develop. So the next key idea about how our brains work, if the areas are not specialized for the functions themselves, I really want to emphasize this idea. The way it works is that these areas come together and they create a function. And we call that emergent functions. And a great example of that is water. As you may remember, water is made up of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. And water has many properties, right? It's a liquid. It can freeze into becoming ice. And when it's ice, it's slippery. It can be made into snowflakes. And we say there's, no 2 snowflakes ever alike. So many different things emerge from water itself. But if you just looked at hydrogen by itself or oxygen by itself, you would have no idea of these properties of water because they don't exist in the hydrogen or the oxygen. They only come into existence. They emerge when the pieces come together. Same thing with our brain. Think about the brain as having these separate areas, right? Each area that has its own cells that does their own firing of cells, but they're not thinking areas themselves. It's not an area where there's memory or there's this word or this feeling. They're doing their own neuro stuff, firing around. But then we combine them. They get linked together. And what happens if you take these units? So you take A and a T and you put them together, and what happens? You have something that's a function, right? It's a word, but I'm saying as a word, it actually has a meaning, a function. And so in the brain, when you put the A and the T, 2 pieces together, you get a function. Now, if you take another part of the brain and said, I'm going to join in with that A area and the T area, what happens? You now have a whole new function. It still uses those first 2 areas, but by adding a 3rd area in, you've got a new function. And now these 3 areas of the brain sort of say, hey, guys, why don't we rearrange ourselves? Still the same 3 areas, rearrange themselves, and now they create a different function. So here's another exercise for you all. Tell me if you can think of any other ways that these things could be arranged so that they now, instead of being isolated letters, actually have a function, in this case, a meaning. So if you can type into the chat box any examples of how you could rearrange these things to produce some functions other than these, go ahead, and then Jose will share with us a few of your ideas. As soon as you've got a few, Jose, let me know, and then we'll just move on to the next slide.
So we have meats as in the plural of what we eat. We have meat single, just having 1 piece of meat. We have teams.
Nice.
We have steam.
Oh, there you go.
And we have seat.
Well, feet, we don't have an F in this one yet, so that would
No,
have to
seat,
wait.
as in what you
Oh,
sit
seat.
on.
Oh, seat. Oh, terrific. Yeah, so there you go. You see the power. You see the power of a system where each element by itself doesn't have the function, but by combining them, you get function. You can make so many different functions. And there you go. That's just some of the ones that you came up with. And you had more there that I didn't have in my list. Now what happens, the brain has many more than like 5 areas, right? Let's just say we take 2 more and add them in. What kind of words can you make then? Now that you've got not 5, but 7 units that you can recombine. Our alphabet, as you know, has, so go ahead, type some more ideas into the chat. But our alphabet has 26 letters. And with 26 letters, you can, the Webster's dictionary has something like 500,000 words. So that's the power of being able to take different units. They have to be different, right? You can't have an alphabet that's only A's. These are different areas of the brain that can combine to make all these different possibilities.
So we have heart in the chat.
Ah,
We have,
nice.
we have rate.
Ah, nice.
Anybody else want to jump one, drop one in here? Well, only at Beyond Access series, folks, can you find yourself at the intersection of literacy and executive cognitive function.
Yeah, exactly. So now the next step up in the hierarchy, right? We have letters. They don't have much function all by themselves. You combine them into words, but words themselves are only part of the story. Then you combine them into sentences. And it's the same emergence. You don't know what sentences I'm going to write just because you know the words. So if you had my talk tonight, and we just sent you, instead of sending the recording, we sent a list of all the words I used and how many times I used each word, you wouldn't know what my talk was about. So so it goes from little units to bigger units to bigger units to bigger units, and that's how we build function. So that's the way we talk about the brain being organized. So we have on the top, the most complex systems, executive functions. And then we have on the bottom, we have the genes inside the cells that help create the neurons. And then we have the simple pathways of just a few neurons, like I said, like a few letters put together to make a single word. And then you have different brain regions so all of these functions, not regions, but all of these systems, each one involves many neurons all over the brain, but they control each other and they incorporate each other. So the executive functions that we were talking about, right? Memory, control, cognitive flexibility, regulate or interact with attention. Some people call that part of the executive function too. It controls emotional reactivity and regulation. And then it controls the stress response, actually the hormones. And then it can actually turn up genes on and off. And what we talk about is 2 concepts here. One is downward causality, where each level, top level, controls what's going on the bottom level. And you have upward causality. So if you have something going on here down here in stress, it can impact executive function. So we already talked about how important executive function is, all these things. How do we measure executive function? So here's one of the tests we use that measures cognitive flexibility and self-control. It's a pretty simple test, and I'm going to ask Jose to do it, but I want you to do it yourselves, everybody watching. But you're going to hear Jose do it out loud, and it'll be interesting to hear how the interpreters do it as well. So Jose, could you read this? What I'd like you to do is tell me what color are the letters in each of these words. So the letters are the basic things. Now they're grouped together to make a word, right? And the word has a meaning to it. So tell me what colors each of these are, Jose, as you go across.
Okay. So I have blue, orange, green, red, and purple.
So now tell me the colors again, the colors of the letters in this sentence, this line.
Blue, green, red, purple, orange.
And the next one?
Purple, orange, red, blue, green.
And the bottom one?
Red, blue, green, orange, purple.
So you all heard, right, that Jose did the first line and the last line faster than those other two lines. And that's because his executive functions were cranking away. He had to use them to control a disregard in some information. Information was coming in that he had to ignore, and then he had to focus to do something else. So that's one test of executive function. Here are two other tests from the scientists at the National Institute of Health created a toolbox of tests of executive cognitive function. And one of them is the way we measure attention with distraction. And in this task, all the person has to do is point on the, hit the arrow key on their computer, indicating which direction this arrow is pointing. And some of the trials are easy, these top ones, because you see the ones, all of them are pointing in the same direction. And you just have to pay attention to this one. But other trials, this one that you have to pay attention to is the opposite direction than these other ones. So you can see that the brain is getting information that is conflicting with this, and it has to ignore. And it slows everybody down, just like compared to this one. Here's a memory test. So working memory is you have to know, you have to remember a list of things. But there's another part of working memory besides just remembering the list. We call it the scratch pad or working part of memory, working memory, where we actually manipulate and use that information. So in this task, the person is shown a series of animals in a certain order. So it might go like this: dog, rabbit, crocodile, bird. And then you have to repeat them back, but in the order from smallest to largest. So you don't see the pictures when you have to repeat them back. The pictures now disappear. I should cover them up somehow. And then you have to remember what you saw, but you reorder them in your mind. So you have to go bird, rabbit, dog, crocodile, even though you heard it, dog, rabbit, crocodile, bird, you have to do it in a different order. So here's data that I've collected, which shows on that test of attention, where they have to hit the key indicating the direction that the arrow is pointing in, how fast can you be? Here are kindergarten through 8th grade kids, and you see steady increase in speed, right? They're able to respond more quickly and not be slowed down as much by that distracting information. This is development of executive function across this period. You know, it continues into young adulthood, but there's very active development during the school years. Here we see another test I didn't show you of self-control. And you see that the self-control score keeps going up. And here's the working memory, keeps going up as well. Now, I just want to point out that as a scientist, this was important for us because we want to know whether our tests are accurate. These tests were given in the classroom to thousands, well, you can see thousands of children across the country, automatically presented by computer. We didn't have them come in and sit in an office with a psychologist to get an assessment. We just did it in the classroom. The teacher had the children log into the program, and yet so it was very important to us to show that we got the type of results that we expected. We showed this nice expected age development of executive cognitive functions. So we've talked some about how important they are and what they are. We've talked about how the brain works and how it then supports these executive cognitive functions. We've talked about how we measure them. So the next section I want to talk about is how can we then improve? Now remember, the brain is neuroplastic. It gets shaped by input from the environment. What we want to do is create experiences where there is activity and input coming from the environment that could specifically improve the function of the brain systems that support executive function. Executive function, not only does it develop, it develops much longer in human beings than any other animals. So it can be affected by environment and can be improved for much longer. the parts of the brain that are supporting executive function are these frontal lobes. And you can see in this brain character here how big that is. If I showed you pictures of other mammals, a bird or a mouse, there would be this brain area down here and just a little tiny bit of of cortex on top of it. This is a big part of the frontal lobe in human beings that supports very important for executive function. And we want to know, how can we strengthen that? How can we harness the brain's neuroplastic potential? So there have been many examples of how powerfully we can shape the structure of the brain. And here's a study where they looked at the parts of the brain involved with moving the fingers and the hands in people who had practiced the violin for many hours as children. And what they saw here, when you play the violin, your left hand is making many rapid, fancy, complicated finger movements, while your right hand is doing this simple bowing motion. Now, the right hand is controlled by the left side of the brain. And this whole area here is called the sensory motor area that's important in all the movements of our body. And this is how big it is on the left side that's controlling that right hand. But look at the right side of the brain in the same area, which has been controlling those left fingers doing all that fancy movements. You can see that it's buffed up. You can see how much the volume has expanded here compared to here. That's neuroplasticity, shaping of the actual structure of the brain. How about a piano player who's using both hands? Look at those two buffed up motor cortices in professional piano players. So why don't we have another poll question now, Jose? Jose, can you hear me, or I don't hear you?
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Yeah, okay.
All right, so our next poll question is a true or false question. And so our genes, our DNA, determine the physical structure of our brains, and there is not much we can do to change our brains. True or false? And I see that we have about 60% of attendees having responded. I love that everyone here is taking to these polls very quickly.
Yeah, they're fun. I think they're fun to do, but it's also, as I said, useful for me because I can't see anybody's faces, and we're not in a classroom where people could raise their hands or let me know that, hey, we can't follow you. What are you talking about? So what do we got here, Jose?
All right, with 72% of votes in, we have 6% saying true and 94% saying false.
And the answer is false. We can do things to change the structure of our brain, literally the structure and function, but the structure right here is what you're seeing. So we would like to take advantage of that in order to improve executive cognitive functions in our children. These systems may be slow to develop. And that's often the case, as we said, for children who learn differently. So this is a very useful resource. It's available online here, online. It's a whole report on brain fitness and executive function. And what this organization did, it's called Brain Futures. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to the use of evidence-based neuroscience practices in education and health. And so what they did is they had their staff review the scientific evidence on all sorts of programs and products that are trying to be sold to schools or sold to you to use at home with your children that claim to improve their memory, their thinking, their executive functions. Because there's a lot of things out there where people didn't do their homework. They didn't do their research. They just said, well, we're going to sell something real quick. So that's why this is such an important service that this nonprofit did. And they have identified 10 different programs that improve where there's strong evidence that they improve executive cognitive function in school kids. So you may want to look at that. And I'm going to give you some of the data that's actually shown there to show you that we really can do that. So this is an example of students who had used a program in school, but you can get the same program to use at home, that gives computer presented cognitive exercises. And what it actually does is that the children are required to do things that use their executive cognitive functions, but the program makes it easier at the beginning. Now, some children, the program may be just too hard for if their executive functions haven't been developed. But many children who learn differently, the programs can start where the easy enough level that their executive function brain systems actually get engaged. And then the program can monitor their performance and adjust for each user the optimal level of difficulty so that the neuroplastic processes, the way we understand them, actually take place. And so that's an example of this program, and this was used in schools across the country, and this was a report published of data from 1,000 children, K through 8, after doing these brain exercises for 5 months. And these are exactly the tests that we were talking about, right? Attention, self-control, and memory. And this is how much they improved in 5 months, 12 to 15% improvement on average in these 1,000 children after doing this cognitive brain training program. And the scientists wanted to know, well, these children got 5 months older. How much would they have gotten better without doing the program if they were just 5 months older? These are the orange bars, because remember, I'm really bringing you along here as junior scientist partners. Remember, we looked at the data with thousands of kids at each grade level, right, to show how their executive functions developed. If they got a year older, so you can use that data to tell exactly how much they would get per month, and then in 5 months. So it wasn't just because they were getting older. And then you might say, well, they took the test twice, once at the beginning of the year and 5 months later. Maybe just taking the test, they get better. So here, the people with this program, they said, okay, we'll just give a couple hundred children the test twice with just 2 weeks apart. And with just 2 weeks apart, you can see they didn't get that much better. So this is the type of thing that lets you know that that there are evidence-based procedures that can harness the brain's neuroplastic potential to actually improve executive function systems. So that's one type. Now here's another type. This is a meditation program. And the kids were doing meditation in school. This was preschoolers, actually. And they did a working memory test, not a working memory test, it was a report by teachers of their sense of the child's memory and the ability to organize. And going down meant they were getting better. They had less problem with it. And there was actually a significantly greater improvement in the group that did the meditation as compared to a control group of children that didn't do it. So this is just one example how meditation can actually improve the same executive functions. There are different ways to get at the brain to help it use its own potential to grow and heal itself. This study also showed that the children had higher reading assessment scores who had done the meditation, and the same thing with that computer training of executive cognitive function. Those kids also have higher, have shown big improvements on standardized tests of math and reading after improving the executive cognitive functions. Because remember, the executive cognitive functions are essential for learning. And you know all too well that when your children are not able to sustain their attention or have problems with their working memory, they can't inhibit themselves to sit still and pay attention to what's going on, don't have the cognitive flexibility, so they get started on one thing and don't switch to another thing, that's going to impact their learning. And in fact, improving the executive functions does translate into improved math and reading proficiency. Here's another one. This time it was physical activity inside the classroom. Now, I think this is so important that I actually mentioned it in the second session for things that you all can do at home. Don't forget physical activity. Don't forget that having the kids get out, I know outside was a danger before, but now it's possible to get outside safely, and the warm weather coming, get outside and have some running around time. It doesn't matter what level learner a child is, being able to move around for part of the day can help them focus later. And that can be particularly important for children, say with ADHD, on task behavior. So this showed in a classroom, K-4 students, they did on behavior ratings, observation by raters in the classroom during 30 minutes before, and then 30 minutes after, doing a 10-minute energizer inside the classroom with some sort of physical activity. And you can see that they had a control group that did it twice and did not get got assessed twice and didn't have the energizer. And they both groups started the same, before the energizer. And then the group that got the energizer had a big increase in their on-task behavior to learn afterwards. So sports and dance, what's so special about them? Well, here we have physical activity with the types of advantages that I just showed you, just getting up and moving around. But there's a lot of cognitive activity that goes on at the same time as the physical activity. Because in sports and dance, you have a combination of specific physical activity and thinking. You have to pay attention, right, to the movement of balls or other players if it's a team sport, the awareness of your own body. You have to have self-control and response inhibition because there are rules to the game, or because the opponent tries to fake you out and you have to be able to inhibit and pay attention. You have to remember the rules. You have to remember the dance moves. Strategic thinking, certainly in sports. Pattern recognition in sports. How those other team getting themselves together. It looks like this guy's going to, be working with that other guy over there, and I got to anticipate that pattern. Cognitive flexibility. I got to keep changing what I'm thinking, and certainly speed of information processing. Everyone involved in physical activity, sports, and dance. Now, some more in some sports than others. I grew up playing baseball, and my son played baseball, but it's not the best one, to tell you the truth, for kids with attention problems, because most of the time you're sitting out there, right, in left field, just waiting for something to happen. And what are you doing? You're not doing all this stuff. But other sports which are constant, whether it be soccer, whether it be basketball, or whether it be dance, those things are constantly involving your executive cognitive functions. And here are just pictures of some simple ones. I mean, juggling, even with just 2 balls, to be able to keep track of them is look at the attention, right? You can see it, right? And now look at this, balancing is just a simple beanbag. These are more of the type of games that you can actually do at home or in the classroom. A beanbag balancing, and it doesn't just have to be on your knee. It can be for fun on your shoulder, it can be on your head. You can walk up and down, up and down in the room. You can have a little contest to see in the family how long can somebody do this. Here's a systematic study that is actually done in China. I already showed you a study of what happens to your brain when you're playing a musical instrument. Well, what happens when you practice gymnastics every day for years as a child? And this is what happens to your brain. Now, this is just not a picture of the brain, right? These are just diagram that represents the brain. And I told you that the brain, because really, I'm so happy I explained these basic principles of brain organization to you, because you can see how they're really part of what neuroscience is about. So they're talking about certain parts of the brain that generally work together. So they're a system of multiple areas. And this one is mostly connected with sensory motor experiences. And this yellow one is more with attention. But obviously they have to connect to each other, right? That's why everything is connected when you're doing anything. If you're playing a sport and you got sensory motor for your body and control and planning your movements, and you have to integrate it with your attention network to know what's going on. And that has to be integrated with the visual input and so forth. So these little subcircles here are little clusters of brain regions that often go together. but they also have to be connected to each other. And these here magenta lines, these are connections that were greater in the gymnasts compared to controls. And these blue ones are ones where the connections were weaker in the gymnasts. So what we've seen, remember going back to that true false question about whether the brain structure is actually changed, not just function, but the physical structure is actually changed by activities that we do after we're born. You can see that these gymnasts, I mean, their brains are wired differently, literally. They now have different connections than other people. And that means that some things are going to be easier to them and some things less easy. So here's a study looking specifically at physical exercise improving executive cognitive function. And by the way, math achievement in 7 to 11-year-olds. Now their sample was a large sample of 171. The kids were not physically active and obese, so that's a special group. And they had an after-school program of different types of activity mixed together. And you can see they had a control group. They had a low exercise dose and a high exercise dose. And executive function in the black bars went up, 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 depending on the amount of exercise, and so did math achievement. Here's another one where they were cognitively engaging exercises to look at executive function outcomes. And this is what you can do. If you want to really play with these things to make them better even for executive function training. They had a team sport playing basketball, but they changed the rules and they would blow a whistle or give a visual sign that the rule had changed and you had to switch something in the rule in the way you played the game. And that was the group that showed the greatest ability in cognitive flexibility, the greatest increase in cognitive flexibility. The other groups did also just aerobic exercise and a different national, this was done in Switzerland, curriculum for exercise in schools, but actually having the team and the basketball and the changing rules led to the biggest benefits. Another study, cognitive development and math learning from martial arts. So that's a different type. That's not team, right? But it's very focused on yourself, sustaining attention, inhibition, and probably when you get into interaction with each other, cognitive flexibility. So I think we should have another poll right now. Jose, please. And unmute.
Sure.
Okay, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So here's our third question for the night, and we're going to launch this poll. And the question is, executive function can be improved by, and your options are playing a musical instrument, taking dancing lessons, martial arts, computer brain training games, meditation, or all of the above. And I see that folks are going in quickly, and we have about 60% responded already.
Wow, fantastic. Everybody's attention is and speed of processing is already increased, or at least even after dinner or before dinner for some of you, but at the end of the day.
So
Dinner.
with about 77% of the vote in,
Mm-hmm.
the results are 100% all of the above.
All right, okay. Well, that's the most satisfying for me. I mean, the last poll at the end, and you're going to see the I don't even need to put up this next slide, I don't think. Key takeaways. Executive functions are important thinking skills for learning. Executive functions control other parts of the brain, right? They create emotions and stress. The structure and function of our brains are shaped by stimulation from the environment. That's what we call neuroplasticity. Now, we don't know why executive function systems are slower, incomplete in the development in some children, and your children, that would be for many of your children. We just don't know why, but we can increase them. And it's just so important to remember for children who may not do so well in some of the academic demands, they may do much better in sports and dancing. And those things can improve the executive function skills. And those executive function skills, as we've been emphasizing, are important for many aspects of life. So any way you can improve the executive function skills is good. And some of them for sure can do better through sports and exercise, sports types of games than they might through just trying to learn math and reading. Exercise can literally make the brain stronger, and sports may be particularly useful for some children who learn differently. Okay, so I don't know if other questions came in, Jose. I forgot with our polls and interaction features here this time. We also had always invited people to write in questions. I don't know if you have any for the last few minutes.
I do have some questions in here, but I want to make a pitch for folks to take some time and add some additional questions in here. All right, so I'm going to. Do you have any additional slides, Dr. Wexler, or are we done with slides?
I think I'm done. I mean,
Okay. Yeah, we can. Well,
oh no, we have one. I think we have one on the next session.
Okay.
So let's just make sure we review that.
Yeah, go ahead and let's do this slide. And as I see some folks are
Well, so
typing in.
yeah, so this is the slide that you can describe better than I think.
Absolutely. So we have a few. Oh, actually, that's a really good point. So we'll talk about this a little bit in a little bit more, but I'll give a preview that we have some interesting additional sessions coming up next week for break that are some interaction sessions for families to do together with children. But I'll share more about that in a moment. And for now, we'll go into the Q&As. And I'm seeing actually quite a few things in here. I'm going to stop the screen share.
Good.
And so one of the things that I'm seeing here is a comment more than a question, saying someone is sharing that their mega attention challenge child found his focus while pitching. He was also incredibly gifted as a catcher, and so that kind of helped him hyper focus.
So there you go. I didn't want to dump on, as what do they say now? Hate on baseball, but there are some positions, and you've got the ones. I mean, pitching, is you're constantly there, and catching, of course. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's terrific. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and I'm happy that was helpful. So we can't get, if we were more interactive, we could actually hear a little bit more about how that manifested the helpfulness. And if the person wants to type in a few things to you about some examples, we may have time to share those.
So you mentioned a couple of studies throughout your presentation. And so one of the questions in here is saying, have there been similar studies done for students, specifically for students with learning disabilities?
Well, almost every learning disability diagnosis label group then, right? And every type of learning disability, children have compromised executive function development. So, so I feel confident in my knowledge about executive cognitive function and saying that it is relevant. I am not an expert on each of the different types of learning disabilities, so I really can't speak to the literature, but I do think that there are specialized interventions probably for some types of more specially defined learning disabilities where they have a better idea for a particular child of a specific type of challenge that they're facing rather than the more general one of executive function. And I'm sure that people are offering specific interventions. I just don't know what they are, and I have not reviewed their scientific merits, so I couldn't comment on it. So that's the answer, right? In general, executive function is going to be relevant for most learning disorders. Yes, there probably are for some more specific interventions focused on the type of challenge that child has, if they're able to characterize it with that specificity.
Thank you so much for that. I think there's another question here, a couple of questions actually that are very similar. As part of your presentation, one of your slides had a link to an NGO executive function program, and folks are wondering if you could share that link so folks can take a look at that on their own time, and then I will just say to them.
Can you put that? Yeah, can you put that in? You have a follow-up email that you sent out?
I was going to say we'll just add that into the follow-up email with the link to the survey for everybody.
But also to the Brain Futures report is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, the link to Brain Futures. Yeah.
That's great. Another question in here. So one of the things, what are some things that you can recommend to help a young child with executive functioning skills, improve executive I'm assuming they mean improve executive function skills.
Mhm. So, yeah, too
I
bad I
think
don't know
you,
what
I
they
think,
mean by young. Yeah, because
yeah,
yeah. So, all these things I've shown you were, like one was preschool, others were kindergarten through fourth grade. So,
maybe let's speak specific to preschool first, because there is a different question about children who are transitioning into 3K.
okay, so preschool, they really, I mean, look at my second talk, about the things you can do at home. Preschool is where you can play all sorts of games with a child that help them focus their attention, and it can be rhythm games. I don't remember if I explained last time the one where you clap together, and then you can make make it a little more complicated pattern. Do a clap, clap, pause, clap, clap, pause. As simple as that. You've got attention, self-control. You build a little more on it. You can say clap, clap, touch your head, clap, clap, touch your head. And now you've made a little pattern of movements, and it can be fun, for little kids. And then you can do touch your nose, clap, clap, nose, clap, clap, head, clap, clap, ears. And then we talked about things like having them, if you go the game of, I'm thinking of a little animal with big ears and a small tail. And so that'd be a type of game that a child could play. Or if you go
Mhm,
shopping in the supermarket and you say, okay, what should we buy for dessert?
mhm.
So there you've got a category, and then they have to think of examples. And then, can you help me find those? And then you're walking down the shelf and they're paying attention. Things like that you can do with little kids.
It almost seems like a lot of these little games that we play as children
Yeah.
are unintentionally or maybe intentionally designed to do those same things.
Red light, green light is one. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or even
Simon.
something as simple as a game of like I Spy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. There you
Just
go. Exactly. That's the name of it. You're right. That's what you can do in the car or walking down the street. Right.
yeah. I think also and it makes me think of like road trip games. Like I have memories of my sister and I playing what we call the alphabet game, where we have a category. So maybe the category is fruits,
Uh-huh.
and you have to go back and forth, and you can't repeat the same fruit.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
it's
That's
so
exactly that. That's another measure of executive function, is generating things in a category. Road trip, where you said road trip games. Yeah,
yeah,
for the car, right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. No,
absolutely. You know,
yeah.
back in the 90s before we all had cell phones, we would
Oh, well,
have
there you go. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. You're right. No, that's a big difference, isn't it? Real, I mean it. I'm not a media or social media hater, but the opportunity in the car for those sorts of games to develop cognitive function are not the same. Yeah.
So you mentioned a term earlier, neuroplasticity.
Hmm.
And when I hear neuroplasticity, I think to the little things that I have. Like I have an application on my phone that's like little daily games and exercises for my brain. And I'm sure a lot of people have them. And so like I think of that as like things and games for myself. But that leads to one of the questions that it leads to a question that someone is asking that as I actually have a question similar to that,
Hmm.
is can you explain a little bit more about the relationship between working memory, executive processing, and processing speed? And I'm thinking about that color game that you
Yeah,
play.
yeah. You did with the reading. Yeah. Executive processing, working memory, and processing speed. Well, so these are all categories that dimensions, right? That we have tried to label. But when you do something, they're not separate. They're all happening together, right? When you're doing executive function and processing speed and memory, memory requires attention. So you can't remember something if you haven't been able to direct and control your attention. If
Mhm,
your processing speed isn't fast enough, you're going to miss information that's coming in. And then you're going to not be able to remember it because it never even got in. So all these things are intimately interrelated. Just think about, remember that distinction. We break them up. Scientists, psychologists break them up into different dimensions that they give a name to, that they want to try and measure. And then they might say that your child has more of a problem in this one than that other dimension. But when it actually comes to function, they're all working together.
Mhm. Absolutely. Dr. Wexler, thank you so much for tonight and for all the information. There's a lot of comments in here saying how they really enjoyed this series so far, and it's been very informative. So
Good.
I just want to say thank you for all the sharing you've been doing.
Okay, my pleasure. Okay, good
Absolutely.
night.
Good night, Dr. Wexler. So, all right, everyone. So we're wrapping up, and as always, I got to remind you of a couple of things that are going on. Uh, After this, you're going to get an email with some information. This week's email is going to be a little different than regular. So you'll still have the link to the survey, which I've dropped into the chat for all of you. You'll have the link to the next session and the recording. But you'll also have a link to a special set of sessions that are happening next week. During the spring break, we're hosting some sessions with Ramapo for Children, and these are interactive sessions for families and children to do together. So if you have some time, take a look at them. If you're interested, join. Seating is limited. There's only about 50 seats per session. So if you're going to join, please do so. And if you're going to register, please be mindful and try to join because there aren't seats available for everyone. We have some sessions that are being done in English and then some sessions that are being done in Spanish. So take a look, see what is the best option for you. And I think those are all the announcements for this week. So thank you everyone for sticking around. Thank you for joining us for another week. Take a moment tomorrow to fill out the survey. It really helps us out. Also, if you are so inclined, let us know in the comments of that survey if you liked the poll function and if you want us to keep using the polls for our presentations. But until next time, stay safe, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a good night.